A cloud of suspicion surrounds the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, whose bodies were found in their Santa Fe home. The FBI wasn't supposed to find anything. They showed up at Gene Hackman's Santa Fe mansion to process the deaths of an elderly couple. It's rolling in incredible new details this hour about the circumstances surrounding his death. His front door open, scattered pills on the bathroom countertop, one dog dead in the closet, two still alive on the property. Routine paperwork, standard documentation, but hidden behind a wall in the actor's private library was something that was never meant to be found. Something buried 312 feet beneath the estate that federal investigators have refused to discuss publicly. The fortress Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead in their Santa Fe mansion on February 26, 2025. Betsy had actually died weeks earlier, around February 3rd. Her body wasn't discovered until investigators found both of them together. Gene's cause of death was listed as cardiovascular disease complicated by Alzheimer's. But the circumstances surrounding that discovery, that's where things stop making sense. To understand what allegedly lies beneath Gene Hackman's estate, you need to understand what kind of place this was. Because this wasn't a celebrity home. It was compound. Richard Castellano spent 20 years consulting on security for celebrities, diplomats, and Fortune 500 executives. When he reviewed Hackman's property systems for a 2019 insurance assessment, he told his team to check the paperwork twice. He thought there'd been a mistake. "I've worked on embassies," Castellano said. "I've consulted for defense contractors. This estate had infrastructure that would make some of them jealous. Military-grade paranoia translated into residential architecture. 23 acres of dense forest, 12-foot stone walls around the entire perimeter, reinforced steel gates, motion sensors, thermal cameras, the kind of surveillance grid you'd expect around a government facility, not a retired actor's home. Staff were hand-picked, vetted, and bound by ironclad NDAs. Anyone who worked on that property was forbidden from speaking about what they saw, what they heard, or what they were asked to build. But here's the catch. That level of security wasn't what raised red flags. What raised red flags was what former contractors remember about the construction requests. Miguel Reyes had been doing foundation work in Santa Fe for 30 years. Basements for mansions, historic adobe retrofits, commercial pours. When he got the call about the Hackman property in the early 2000s, he thought it would be routine. It wasn't. They wanted concrete walls 18 inches thick in certain sections of the basement, Reyes said. His voice dropped. "That's bunker-level construction." I asked what it was for. They said storage. He paused. "But you don't build storage like you're expecting a bomb." Reyes was paid triple his normal rate. He signed an NDA prohibiting him from discussing the work for 20 years. That NDA expired in 2024, 1 year before Hackman's death. And get this, when investigators finally asked Reyes to describe the full scope of what he'd been asked to build, he couldn't, because he only worked on one section. There were other contractors, specialists to handle the deeper levels. Levels that Reyes was told never existed. The discovery. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo had spent 22 years photographing the worst things human beings do to each other. Cartel executions, mass graves, crime scenes that gave veteran agents nightmares for years. When she walked into Gene Hackman's mansion on February 26th as part of the initial FBI response team, she expected sadness. An elderly couple, natural causes, routine documentation. She wasn't prepared for what came next. "Something felt wrong immediately," she said later. "It wasn't the silence, it wasn't the grandeur, it was the details that didn't add up." Furniture had been moved recently. You could see the impressions in the carpet where pieces had stood for years. Scuff marks on the hardwood floors didn't match the couple's limited mobility. Personal documents in Hackman's study appear to have been rifled through and hastily reorganized. Here's the thing. Either someone had been searching for something specific, or Hackman himself had been preparing in his final days, hiding certain items, relocating others. The scene didn't match the official narrative of two elderly people dying quietly of natural causes. But the real discovery came in the library. Dr. Okonkwo was running her hand along the mahogany paneling, checking for hidden compartments, standard procedure in high-value estates. That's when she felt it. A section of wall, approximately 4 feet wide, that resonated differently when tapped, hollow. Behind that panel, concealed so perfectly it would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, was a narrow passageway. Stone steps worn smooth by what appeared to be decades of use spiraled downward into absolute darkness. The air rising from below was cold, damp, and carried a smell that one agent described as like opening a tomb that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. But the tunnel wasn't just old, it had been reinforced with modern concrete in certain sections. Fresh electrical conduits ran along the walls. Someone had been maintaining this passage recently. The tunnel measured roughly 36 inches wide and descended at a steep angle. The original stonework appeared to date back nearly a century. Whoever built it hadn't just dug a hole in the ground. They had engineered something designed to last forever. The question was, what were they trying to keep sealed inside? Doctor. Okonkwo stood at the top of those stairs for a full minute before descending. Later, she admitted she'd considered turning around, walking away, pretending she'd never found the panel. "I've been in situations where my instincts told me to leave," she said. "Crime scenes where the danger was obvious. This was different. The danger wasn't obvious, but my body knew something my mind didn't. She went down anyway. And whatever was waiting at the bottom, it changed everything. If this is your first time here, subscribe now because what they found at the bottom of those stairs has never been reported anywhere else." Into the darkness. The descent took nearly 15 minutes. 312 feet below the library floor, the staircase finally opened into a chamber that researchers have since dubbed the Vault. The room measured approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, with ceilings arched in a style that local historian Dr. Elena Vasquez identified as consistent with Spanish colonial architecture from the late 1800s. Dr. Vasquez had been researching the property's history for years before Hackman's death. What she'd found kept her up at night. The property changed hands 7 times between 1920 and 1965, she said. Each transaction was deliberately structured to obscure the buyer's identity. Shell companies, anonymous trusts, deliberately vague documentation. She leaned forward. That's not normal real estate activity. That's the kind of paper trail you create when you're hiding something important or someone. And here's what else her research turned. Up. Between 1945 and 1950, 3 separate property surveys of the land had been commissioned. All 3 surveyors submitted incomplete reports. 2 of them left New Mexico within months of beginning their work. The third died in a car accident 6 weeks after his final visit to the property. And here's where it gets disturbing. The chamber itself was filled with artifacts that tell a story nobody wants to hear. Stacks of wooden crates lined the walls, 47 in total according to the initial inventory. Some were intact, others had crumbled with age, their contents spilling across the stone floor. Dust covered everything, the kind of dust that takes decades to accumulate. But in certain spots near the crates, the dust had been disturbed. Recently, someone had been down here and it wasn't the FBI. Inside one crate, agents found a leather-bound ledger dated 1947. Every page filled with names, dates, and financial figures, all of it written in German. Another crate contained photographs, 63 images, fragile and yellowed. Men in military uniforms that didn't match any recognized armed forces from any known nation. Some photos showed meetings in dimly lit rooms. Others captured locations that researchers still haven't been able to identify. Several depicted individuals whose names had been deliberately scratched out, erased from history with surgical precision. But here's what really shook the investigators. One photograph showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be the very entrance to this tunnel, taken sometime in the 1940s based on clothing and image quality. Two of the faces had been carefully cut out of the photograph. Someone didn't want these men identified. Ever. The symbols, the crates were disturbing. The photographs were worse. But when Dr. Okonkwo's flashlight swept across the far wall of the chamber, she dropped her camera. The chamber walls were covered in markings, hundreds of them, and they didn't match any known language or writing system on Earth. She photographed over 300 individual symbols during the initial documentation. Her hands were shaking by the end. In 22 years, she'd never had that reaction to evidence before. I couldn't look at them for more than 30 seconds at a time, she admitted. There was something about the way they were carved, the precision, the intent behind them. I've seen things that would break most people, but those symbols made me feel like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Some symbols resembled ancient alchemical signs used in medieval Europe. Others looked like technical schematics, blueprints for mechanisms that appeared far too advanced for the era in which they were supposedly created. But here's the catch. A few of them matched astronomical charts. Dr. Marcus Webb, an astrophysicist who later examined the photographs, spent 3 weeks analyzing them. If these charts represent real stellar positions, that he said carefully, they would correspond to a date approximately 12,000 years in the past. He paused. Or potentially, and this is where it gets deeply unsettling, 12,000 years in the future. The mathematical precision is remarkable. Whoever created these wasn't guessing. They understood orbital mechanics at a level that would have been impossible in the 1800s. Some investigators believe the markings are just the eccentricities of a previous owner, an amateur occultist with too much time and money. Others suggest they're coded messages designed to be deciphered only by those possessing the right key. And then there's the third theory, the one that keeps researchers awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. Some believe these symbols represent knowledge that was never supposed to be discovered, information passed down through generations of secret keepers who understood something about our world that the rest of us were never meant to know. If they're right, everything we think we know about this estate just became a cover story. But the symbols weren't the most disturbing thing in that chamber, the door that shouldn't exist. At the far end of the chamber, partially concealed behind a stack of deteriorating crates, agents found something that made everyone stop cold. An iron door, 8 feet tall, 4 in thick. Its surface was covered in rust and grime, clearly untouched for decades. There was no handle, only a heavy, corroded lock mechanism that appeared designed to keep something sealed away permanently. One FBI agent who was present, speaking anonymously, described the moment they found it. We'd seen the crates, the symbols, but when we pushed aside those boxes and saw that door, everyone went quiet. His voice dropped. It wasn't just old, it felt old, like something that had been waiting down there before any of us were born. He hesitated. And there was this feeling, I know how it sounds, but there was this feeling that it didn't want to be opened. And here's the deal. The door remains sealed to this day. No official explanation has been given for why authorities haven't attempted to open it. The FBI has refused to comment. Official statements have been deliberately vague, carefully worded, almost like someone is intentionally keeping a lid on this. Some investigators speculate the tunnel connects to a larger underground network, Cold War-era bunkers, or even older military installations that have been erased from official records. Others believe it leads to a secondary chamber containing whatever was too dangerous to store in the outer vault. A few researchers have suggested the door was never meant to be opened again, that whatever lies beyond it was sealed deliberately, permanently, by people who understood exactly what they were locking away. And here's the detail that changes everything. Geological surveys of the surrounding area, conducted years before Hackman purchased the property, show anomalies in the subsurface terrain, hollow pockets extending hundreds of feet in multiple directions. The tunnel may not be a single passage, it may be a network. But here's what makes this even more unsettling. Thermal imaging of the door revealed something no one expected. There's airflow on the other side. Whatever space exists behind that iron barrier, it's not a dead end. It continues deeper underground. How deep? Nobody knows. The FBI won't say, and independent researchers haven't been allowed close enough to find out. Miguel Reyes remembers something that still haunts him. They asked me about blast-resistant doors once, he said. Industrial grade. The kind you'd see in government facilities. He shook his head. I told them I didn't do that kind of work. He swallowed hard. They said they'd find someone who did. The final weeks. The neighbors always knew something was different about the Hackman estate. Maria Sandoval lived on a neighboring property for 15 years. She remembers one night in particular around 2017. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. My dog was barking at something. I went outside and I heard this sound, like heavy machinery, but muffled, coming from underground. She paused. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, then stopped. I told my husband the next morning. He thought I was imagining things. Her voice hardened. But I know what I heard. Something was happening under that estate. Other neighbors reported similar experiences over the years. Strange vibrations, trucks arriving in the middle of the night with no explanation. Power fluctuations that seemed to originate from the Hackman property. One neighbor said they saw Gene Hackman himself outside at 3 o'clock in the morning on multiple occasions in his final years, standing perfectly still, staring at a specific spot on his property. The same spot where investigators later discovered the tunnel entrance. And get this, former staff members who left the property seem to have vanished from public life entirely. Workers from decades past who simply cannot be located. Local researchers who began investigating the property's history and then stopped responding to inquiries. Nobody knows why. But here's what keeps investigators up at night. The connection between that underground chamber and the deaths of Gene and Betsy Hackman. Official reports say natural causes. The medical examiner confirmed cardiovascular disease with Alzheimer's as a contributing factor, but the timing feels impossible to ignore. Betsy died around February 3rd. Her body wasn't discovered for over 3 weeks. Gene died sometime later alone in that mansion with his wife's body. Security footage from external cameras. The only footage that survived since internal recordings were mysteriously corrupted. Shows lights going on and off in different rooms during the weeks before his death was discovered. Someone was moving through that house. What happened during those final weeks? Did Gene discover something in the tunnel? Was he searching for something specific? Hiding something before it was too late? Some investigators believe the couple was silenced because they knew too much. Others suggest the tunnel provided access for someone to enter the mansion completely undetected. A few believe Hackman himself went into that chamber one final time, and what he found there is what killed him. No one has explained why the internal security cameras were corrupted. No one has explained why Betsy's death went unnoticed for weeks in a property with that level of surveillance. And no one has explained why, in his final days, Gene Hackman appeared to be systematically reorganizing his personal documents as if he knew someone would come looking. What they don't want you to know. The investigation is ongoing. FBI forensic teams continue analyzing every artifact, every document, every symbol carved into those ancient walls. Dr. Vasquez has assembled a team of historians, cryptographers, and archaeologists to examine the publicly available evidence. What we found is just the tip of the iceberg, she said. The tunnel predates Hackman's ownership by at least 70 years. The question isn't just who built it or why. The question is, what was Gene Hackman's relationship to whatever secrets it contains? Here's what nobody is saying out loud. Property transfer records show someone has already filed paperwork to purchase the estate. The buyer? An anonymous trust registered in the Cayman Islands. No names, no public filings. Just a shell entity with enough capital to acquire one of the most restricted properties in the American Southwest before investigators have even finished processing the scene. Whoever they are, they want access to that tunnel, and they want it fast. Federal authorities have the property under restricted access. Journalists who have attempted to investigate have been turned away at the perimeter. Freedom of information requests have been denied, every single one, on grounds of an ongoing investigation. But here's the thing. An ongoing investigation into what, exactly? 2 elderly deaths ruled natural causes? Since when does that warrant federal classification? The iron door is still sealed. The 47 crates are in federal custody. The symbols remain undeciphered. The ledger written in German, the one filled with names that were supposed to have been erased, has not been publicly acknowledged by any agency. And the airflow behind that door? the space that continues deeper underground, past what thermal imaging can measure. Nobody's talking about it. The way Hackman retreated from public life, the fortress he built in the desert, the surveillance grid that rivaled government installations. Gene Hackman wasn't hiding from fame. Investigative sources suggest he was guarding something buried long before he ever set foot on that property. Some researchers believe he didn't just stumble onto the tunnel when he bought the estate. They believe he purchased it specifically because he knew what was beneath it, that he spent decades as its guardian, and that in his final days, alone in that mansion, he was making sure the wrong people would never get their hands on what was hidden 312 feet below his library floor. But here's what we still don't know. Who built the tunnel in the first place? Who wrote the German ledger in 1947? Whose faces were cut from those photographs? And why? After all this time, has the FBI not opened that iron door? The question isn't whether those secrets exist. The evidence suggests they do. The question is, what happens when that door finally opens? And who's going to be standing on the other side when it does? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe if you want to see what we uncover next, because this story is far from over.